What's up, everyone? Welcome to Nation News. Our mission is to connect and inspire our Islander community by sharing Islander success stories with everyone. So stay tuned for the full episode. This is the first interview I have with Andrew Vale, and I'm super excited to get to know your story. A Polynesian Pacific Islander, they just clicked on this podcast, this interview, and they're listening to it, trying to figure out, should I listen to the whole thing? What would you say to that person of why they need to listen to what you have to say?
It's essentially what I've got to say is there's no better time to be alive for a Pacific Island person. Everything's there for us to exceed and to accept, and to really thrive. But sometimes the stories that we hear are kind of shaping us and informing us to think the opposite. But man, my message is there's no better time to be alive. Grateful to God that I'm alive at this time. Grateful to our forebears and ancestors who came before us to get us to this point in time. And so while it's a great time to be alive, we also got a duty and responsibility to really capitalize on the opportunities that are there. And I reckon we're going to get there from sharing positive stories like a platform that you've created here. And rather than those hopeless stories of the data that says we're overrepresented in really negative deficit kind of places like suicide and youth justice and chronic health disease stats and stuff like that. Those are very real and we should acknowledge those problems, but we should focus more of our time on innovative solutions. And the times now, man, like it's a perfect storm for us Pacific people, Polynesian people, whether you're based there in the States or down here in Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah, man, I completely agree with that. And there was a paper you wrote in 2019 where you were exploring that, talking about health in our community as Islanders. Can you walk me through why you wanted to study that in the first place, and then some of the things that you found in that paper?
Yeah, man. My wife and I both were working in universities. She's got a PhD in public health, so essentially, I just kind of was on the back of her research. But most researchers come at us to figure out problems. Uh, that's great, but they should really also come at us to think about solutions. Because what they know, we know. If we think about universities as a body of knowledge or where the body of knowledge sits, we can get access to, we can study them. We know what's written in their books and their texts. We have easy access to it. They haven't really accessed our knowledge systems. And so I'm just excited, man. And I think we as a Pacific, as a nation of, or a group of Pacific people, it's our duty to take our knowledge system into the mainstream because moving forward, if we bring all that beauty of that knowledge together, we can really create some awesome solutions. Um, and the state of play in our nations really demand it because if we carry on doing what we've already done, we'll always get what we always got. It's going to take someone like, or it's going to take a body of knowledge like ours to not disrupt, but to add value and create new stuff. And in some senses, disrupt what's going on.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And when you were growing up, Andrew, what were some of those common stories that you heard in the community, and how did they, as you put it, hold you back or hold us back?
I guess we'll paint the picture first. So, the story is a migrant story. My parents both migrated from Samoa to New Zealand. And like I just said, man, migrants don't move to another place to do worse. They leave their shores really hopeful, leave thinking they're going to make their family proud and themselves proud. They think with a futuristic kind of mindset where my children and their children will thrive. And so, if we have a look at the context, my parents moved to a place where there were uh, other Polynesian and Pacific cultures around because we often move due to family and kin. Like we move to where our cousins and our relations are, and that's our support group when we go to these new horizons. So my dad was in a steel mill for 30 years, so he was primary industry. My mum raised us, and sometimes she had a job working in shops, and she also drove a bus and did things like that. But mostly she was a stay-at-home mother, and she really nurtured us. So as time went on, man, there was multicultural kind of neighborhoods, but then it just kind of got browner and browner. And then the narrative that comes with that is, oh, that's a poor area or that's a low socioeconomic area, and then these are the problems. Um, but as kids, we were oblivious to those narratives. Mostly, we just played out in the streets until the lights came on, street lights came on, played marbles, played like handball and gutterboard and all those kinds of things. Man, we were just having the times of our lives. So the stories didn't really impact us until we start to think, oh man, there are some stories around there. Around, is this really a poor area? Because I never imagined myself as being poor, and I didn't even think I was poor anyway. My parents worked hard to give us a good upbringing. So there were some narratives that could be based on deficit and kind of get you down, but I didn't really believe it. I didn't really pay much attention to it because inside the house, the stories were always shaped by hope, high expectations, and we were blessed to be where we were. But in saying that, I know that in general society, when we were growing up, there were those narratives of, oh, that's a poor area, and these are all the problems that come with it.
How do you how do you try to overcome those types of stories? Like, if when you're living in those, say I'm in a situation like that, how do I reframe it into a positive way where I can use it to help me move forward in life?
Yeah, man. Well, stories, culture is really based on the stories you tell. Uh, so we've actually got a responsibility to tell better stories if the stories that are coming from outside our cultures aren't good. And so, man, like you said, no one else is going to reframe it for you. You got to frame it yourself. Um, so often we think if we get into a mindset where, oh, they're telling a story about me, and then we believe that story, it's going to impact us more than it's going to impact them, and that can go into, like you said, victim mindset. And when you're in a victim mindset, you've lost all your power and you've lost all your agency because you're giving it over to them. So you're saying until they change the story about me, I'm not going to change because I'm in a pissed off state. I'm really negative. Uh, I've apathy. I've got fear. I've got mistrust. Those are the values that really underpin victim mindset. But when you understand that the power and the agency lies within, man, you live out a life that's really courageous, that backs yourself, and has a duty to yourself and family. Make the most of opportunities. You also see the world differently. You see it. You see it full of hope. You see it full of opportunity. And if you're a victim, you're just saying, "Oh man, they're a problem." You just see problems everywhere. Problems are easy to identify, man. Solutions are hard to make.
Yeah, because something that I've seen, at least in my life, is that looking at these quote unquote negative stories, these negative experiences that I've had, and shifting them and looking at those things as a positive view has really helped me. And so, in your life, what pain do you cherish?
Um, First of all, like I'm human, man. I don't really cherish any pain. Not while you're going through it, you know what I mean. But
Yeah,
you
exactly.
you have to extract the pleasure out of the pain, because if you don't, you won't understand why you went through it. I think the first thing for me, which I've learned later in life, is you're absolutely going to go through it. Nothing is a clear ride through to your goal. There's going to be ups and there's going to be heaps of downs. And in fact, those downs are going to shape and, and inform how you're going to get to your destiny. And you don't see that, like, there's not many platforms that are clearer than in business, because you could think you've got all the solutions, but you take that solution to the market. If no one buys it, it's not a solution. You know what I mean? Like, you could have all the opinions, but the opinion that matters is the market. And so you've got to go back. If the market doesn't buy it, you got to change your marketing. You got to change, do that stuff like split testing and stuff like that, because you got to put it on the shelf. And no one believes in it. You've got to change it.
And so, for you, how did that? How did you end up at where you are now, where you're in the business of amplifying our voices? Can you walk me through the story of when you graduated and then you decided, you know what, I'm gonna find a solution for this?
I think I had a bigger picture. I just had a belief that we're special. We're special as a people. and we've got a lot to contribute to the world. And I think a big part of that was one going to a school that was in the city, and we were absolutely the minority as Pacific kids and students. And originally going to that school, I just thought, oh man, they're all racist. Oh, I stick out. Oh man, all those kinds of stories went through my head because I was like 13 to 17. This was high school. But at the end of it, when I was like 17, I left that school knowing that all those different races and all those different people became my best mates. So that was a really good experience because it threw me into kind of like a den. There were all sorts of people, and back in my suburb, like I mentioned earlier, it was mostly brown. So often we're good at hanging out with our own, but the challenge is really to go out there and experience different cultures. And then I just had this desire to travel, and when you travel, you just see how special Pacific personalities are, and the attributes that we have. We share a lot. We're pretty laid back. We're pretty talented, to be honest. And when you get out there in and amongst different cultures, they'll see like people that I hung out with would go on the rugby field and just smash other people and be really awesome, come off and then sing barbershop quartet and play musical instruments and tell jokes and then go into meetings and be really articulate. So you can't really see the beauty inside of your culture until you go and experience it in relation to others. So travel was massive for me, and I knew I loved doing that, and I traveled through my 20s up until my 30s.
That's awesome. What was your favorite place you've been to? What'd you love so much about it?
It's a bit sentimental, but I love Fiji. But my wife and I got
There you
married
go.
there, and they're truly, um, they're truly just people. They're just beautiful people, and they're really gentle. They're really hospitable. But outside of the Pacific, because I'm a bit biased to the Pacific, um, I like Dubai. I lived there for a few years, and I just loved that it was a place where people thought whatever I can think I can make, I probably can make. So there were hardly any challenges there, like in terms of mindset. People who migrate there have a massive view of the world and a massive view of what they can achieve in the world. And I just love being around there.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then, so after you're done traveling from your 20s to 30s, what do you decide to go into?
Yeah, man. I came back to Brisbane, Australia. So I came back to Queensland, Australia, and I just wanted a totally different career. I'd been living prior to that in Dubai, and a lot of it was I'd studied law, and I'd played really low grade footy around the world. I used it as a ticket. And then, man, I at that point I gave my life to the Lord in honest truth, and I just asked him, "Well, what do you want me to do now?" And I got into working with young offenders, Māori and Pacific Island young offenders here in Queensland. So they were in the system, they were in the juvenile system, and I became a youth worker. And
Awesome.
yeah, yeah. So it was fun. We had a really good crew. It was really important work, but the program wasn't working for me. It wasn't really culturally nuanced or tailored. Pailangis were kind of running it and stuff, and I don't really hold back in my opinions, and I just kept telling my boss, "Oh, this ain't gonna work. It's not really tailored well for Pacific people, and we can make it better." And he kept like saying, "Oh, you just go do your job. You're a youth worker. You can't tell me what to do, etc." And so I one day I sent him a rude email saying, "Man, this isn't going to work. There's an opportunity cost here." And then I thought, "Man, I'm going to go meet him and I'm going to go tell him to his face." And I met him at the hallway, and he was like, "How dare you get to my office?" And I was like, "No, you get to your office." And then at his office, yeah, I had two options and he had one. Mine was either to get fired or resign, and his option was whatever I chose. So I had to leave there, and I started my own NGO, non-profit organization, and we started doing the same thing, but we had ownership this time, and so I didn't have to fight with the boss because we were the bosses, and it just went from there. I didn't really have a big plan. I just solved that one problem, and then other problems came. Other people came seeking solutions to their problems, mostly to do with working with the Pacific Island community. So cultural awareness, strategy, policy, mentoring programs in schools. It just grew out like that, and we just said yes to whatever they asked us to do.
Hey, what was it like for you when you decided to quit and then take the step forward to start your own thing and just dive right into
You know, I didn't really decide because I had no no real option. I was going to get fired, so like at that point, you don't have an option. You have to go do what you said you were going to do. So if I created my own, but I was that complaining guy in the organization that I was at, then I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't do it excellently and if I didn't do it to how I thought it would work. So I feel like I had no option. I had to do it, otherwise I'd be full of it. You know, you can complain and you can complain, but when you get a shot, if you don't take that shot, then like that's on you.
it. So then you go into this, you start this new thing. What was it like for you to be in that leadership position, to try to build something that you're passionate about?
Yeah, I always say, man, leadership is not natural for me. I'm the youngest of three siblings. And you know what it's like in the Pacific community, man, like in families. Respect your elders can often go to the youngest doesn't say anything and doesn't really get a voice. And so I knew my place. Well, sometimes I knew my place as the youngest. I had to just kind of bite my tongue and stuff like that. I'm not really good at that, but I knew that that's the structure I came from. So I didn't really foster leadership. I didn't really like leadership. But when you go into creating something, you're kind of a leader by default. If you've got a vision, the only way to enact that vision is get other people to come with you, and that requires leadership qualities. And man, I was really awkward of leadership. I didn't ever call myself the founder or the leader. Um, but you become a leader by default because you hang up a vision and people come with you. Well, they don't know what that they didn't get the vision. You did. So you've got to lead that thing. So I just got into studying. I got into trying to meet new people. This is why I did the podcast. The podcast was really I just wanted to meet people who could inspire me and I could learn off. Um, and I just want to better stories around me. I met a guy named George Fonua, Tongan dude in Newcastle here in Australia. He's doing amazing things around organizational psychology, around high performance of companies. Um, and he just allowed me to kind of shadow him. So man, I just followed and I just soaked it up. I went to the University of Podcasting and I just learned heaps of stuff. I read heaps of books and I just try to fill gaps by learning more.
What was the biggest challenge that you faced after you started your own thing?
The biggest challenge was influencing people. Um, when you're trying to create cultural change, and I'm not talking about ethnic culture, but when you're trying to, you have to win the hearts and minds of people if your product or your service is gonna be eaten up by the market. You can't just put it out and say, "Here, have this. It's gonna be good for you." They have to believe in their minds and their hearts that what you're offering them is gonna be good for you, and then they need s- they're gonna put skin in the game by putting money down. And it's really hard to influence people to put money down if you don't have a compelling case. So it was a challenge for me because I'd never been brought up in business. I didn't know anything about business. My parents, my dad worked in a steel mill for 30 years. He did come out and own a taxi company and a taxi business and stuff like that. But I was oblivious to the principles of business. And I found them really useful because if we were going to contribute to the world, we had to make sure we influenced and persuaded the world that they needed what we. So then that's selling and marketing.
How do you do that?
Oh, that's selling and marketing, man. You know what I mean? And people buy
Yeah,
off people they like. People need to trust that you can get them a solution or a result. And but yeah, and then for me on my side, they just need to be able to pay.
my god. Something that you kept mentioning this was that people come to you, they come with problems, and you have to find those solutions. Harder to find those solutions. How do you go about finding those?
It's making meaning and sense of all of our experience. So most of the problems that came at me were people in government, people in schools, people in sports clubs, etc. They didn't know how to get the best out of Pacific people. And so for us, we had to provide them a framework and a process in order for them to help them foster excellence out of their people. So coaches and teachers, man, they get into those kind of professions because they want to bring the best out of people. And essentially what I was saying was culture counts. You got to understand culture. Like not every kid sitting in front of you is the same. And in some places, there's a high proportion of Pacific people in that class or sports club or government department. And so I just had to influence them that culture counts and I can get you a result and I can provide you a framework to use. It's not too hard.
Got it. And was there a time in your life where you almost lost it all? And and what did you learn from that? If it did happen.
Yeah, man. There's many times like growing up, I was just like every other kid in New Zealand. I wanted to play rugby to the highest level, and at 19, I broke my leg, and the doctor said I couldn't. I wasn't going to play anymore, and I couldn't really accept that. I didn't have the resilience to accept it. I didn't really want to talk to anyone, and at that point, you know, I just I met up with other dudes who were probably going through the same thing, and we all just like to drink together. But when I reflect on that, and our use of alcohol, we weren't actually there for each other because we loved each other's company. We were there because we were all motivated to run away from the stuff we couldn't deal with. And so I don't even really hang out with these people anymore. So they're not my best friends. And it just showed that we were there trying to cope. And then all the way through life, man, dealing with your parents do their best, but they can often, those who are closest to you can influence you the most for positive and negatively. And my parents, they were the greatest parents, but they had a really rocky relationship with each other. And often my travel really was motivated by trying to get away from that. It's that scarring on the heart, that scarring on the person, and it's something that you have to deal with. But George Fanua, from Blue Bus Revolution, who I mentioned earlier, he's got a saying that's adversity is the gymnasium for resilience. And so, if we see our adversity through that lens, man, a lot of Pacific people should be masterly in terms of resilience because we have to go through a lot of adversity. And so, man, it's we got to lap it up too.
What's the best piece of advice that you've ever gotten?
It's going to sound cheesy, man, but just trust in the Lord for me. Like this is my own. As a Christian, man, it's not about me, and that's the best thing because ego is a really can be really detrimental. And as a Christian, you submit everything to Jesus, and it's just a beautiful thing because He takes all your burdens and stuff. And so, if you want a secular version though of the advice, it's just be excellent in everything you do because at every step, if people see excellence, they'll see it as a habit, and then they'll come back to you because people trust excellence.
In your life, what part of your work makes you come alive?
Everything, man, everything that I do. We- Our business is an integrated community advancement firm. It's all about people advancement. It's all about advancing communities. As Pacific people, we're people. We were we grew up in mobs. We grew up in villages. We want our villages to thrive, and so we deal with child protection, kids who have no parents, kids whose parents are junkies, or kids who have been abused in some way. Man, that's a privilege for us to work in that space and for these kids to trust us. We wake up every day with the burden and the blessing of working with these kids. And then we do consulting, we do cultural training, we work with people, we work with organizations for high performance, man. That's that's awesome. Just love it.
That is sick. How are you able to combine this thing that you're super passionate about with also something that you do for a living?
Like I said, man, you've got to. For me, it's I had to learn business, even though I was in a non-profit. You have to learn the principles of business because you can. When I had kids, I got 4 kids. If I carried on volunteering out there, and there's a massive place for volunteering, the wheel doesn't really turn if there's no volunteers. But at the end of the day, also, we as volunteers, as we give our time out there, there's an opportunity cost. Our children don't get that time. So as soon as I had my first child, my first daughter, I knew, well, when I go out there and do this stuff, I should get paid for it. Um, because if I don't, then I should stay home with dad. And people might find that as controversial, but when I learned that, I just doubled down on learning business and intersecting my passion. How do I make profit with my passion? And it's come out to this. We've got 4 companies and a non-profit in our group of entities, and we work with the people we love. We do work we love. We integrate our culture and our approach because we own the thing and we can design our whole operation. And then we we have more control over it. There's the least level of friction because we own it.
If I'm an islander and I'm listening to your story, I'm a Polynesian, and I heard your story talking about how I need to go and learn business. What's the first piece of advice that you give? What should I do?
I think before you learn business, you got to learn what your passion is and who you are. Like Simon Sinek says, find out your why, and that's really important. But before that, I think you got to find out your who. Like, who are you and who are you designed to be? And then why are you designed to be that? And when you intersect those or when you align those, then you know what kind of role will get you out of bed every morning. Pump. Then after that, then you should learn business because then you should know, okay, so if this is who I am and what I'm supposed to do, how do I do that in a way that can support me to live and thrive?
That makes sense. You mentioned Simon Sinek. What media do you consume? Would that be like podcasts, books,
Yeah,
other
and
forms of media?
I, I was books, but I was books. I love to buy books and I love to read books, but I'm more podcasts right now, man. Because I live about an hour from my office. I live in the Gold Coast. My office is up in Brisbane, and I use that hour just to keep learning. It's the University of Podcasting in the car. You could learn a language in there, man. There's enough time to learn a language in there. You can learn whatever. So whatever challenge I'm going up against, whether it's in the business or whatever it is, man, I just look up a podcast, get it ready, and then that's me for an hour up and an hour down. One lecture each
Awesome.
way.
Is there any podcast that you keep coming back to?
Yeah, but they're really specific around business, so they'll probably be boring. But there's a guy named Nick Bradley, Scale Up. I always go to him. Jonathan J. I listen to some Gary V. I've kind of come off him now. Not that he's not interesting to me, um, but yeah, I'm just kind of really into pointy podcasts that relate to what I'm going through as an owner of business and as a community development guy.
Bring it up because I don't want to take too much time. Was there anything that you wanted to talk about that I missed?
No, man, I just like I said, man, these platforms are great. We need to share really good stories. We need to share positive stories because change comes through hope more than it does out of deficit and out of despair. So let's just share great stories. We're doing similar kind of things. I love that you're doing it out there in the States, and I know there's a massive population out there in the States. So, man, I'd love to hear what's going on there in the States, and how it relates to people like me down here in Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah, awesome. And final question, and I want to ask this question to everyone is if you were able to put up a sign and this sign would go on to every Polynesian, every islander in the world, it would go right up on their front door. And so every single islander Polynesian that would see this sign every day, what would it say?
Oh man, that's a great question. A tough one too. It would probably say something along the lines of, "Your ancestors worked hard to get you here. What are you going to do about it?"
Awesome, man. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. That was great hearing your story and learning more.
No, thanks, Tim. Man. I love what you're doing, and keen to stay in touch.
Sorry. Hey, you made it. Thanks for listening to this Islander success story. If you want more of these, head over to Nesian.news. Sign up for our newsletter. We'll send you an email every single time we put an Islander success story out there. And remember, our mission is to connect and inspire Islanders around the world.